So I'm doing this because you asked me. Because at the end of this, you will realize that we don't know more than we knew before. I'm obviously talking about the F-47. Hi, I'm Gas. Welcome to Millennium 7. So first of all, a brief summary of the facts. There has been a press conference in the Oval Study at the White House where President Trump announced that the NGAD got unstuck. The announcement was that contract for the aircraft development and production has been awarded to Boeing. This is the project that was previously called the NGAD, New Generation Air Dominance, and before that it was called the PCA, Penetration Counter Air, and now it has received an official Air Force number. It is the F-47. This time we don't know what happened to the numbers between 35 and 47. Some sources quite cynically point out that since Trump is the 47th president of the United States, we didn't have a cost of the program or a cost per unit for the aircraft. We all know that it's going to be very different at the end of the project, but just to have an estimate. But we will have it quite soon because in the Congress documents related to the budget in a few months, we probably should start seeing the first lines related to the F-47 program. We also have a hint of a timeline in the sense that it seems that the prototype will fly before the end of the Trump presidency. So 2028, which probably means first deliveries 2032-33 and full-scale production 35-36. And I want to be clear because I've seen so much on the internet. The aircraft doesn't exist. A prototype doesn't exist. What some people thought were prototypes of the aircraft were just technology demonstrators, like every program like this basically nowadays is implementing, because this is called de-risking of the technology. That is, if a technology doesn't work, you don't build an entire program around it. So to all those people who left comments under my videos saying that the NGAD has flown years ago, so there's nothing to worry about the Chinese sixth-generation aircraft, or alleged sixth-generation aircraft, you're definitely wrong, okay? This aircraft doesn't exist yet. Why this announcement is important? Well, for two reasons, basically. The first one is that the NGAD got unstuck. For some time, it seems that the Air Force was rethinking the project. It seemed that they were going to scale down the complexity and the technology of this project, but in the end, as we see, it got unstuck. It also seemed for a while that concept about a light fighter was going to emerge, but in the end the project got unstuck. Which for us aircraft nerds is good because we have something very interesting to follow. In any case, it doesn't seem to be a really simplified variant of the original project. At least there is no trace in the declarations. The other important element is not tactical, operational, technological, strategic. It is industrial. In fact, Lockheed Martin, that seemed to have sort of monopoly of fighter for the United States Air Force, has been pushed aside. Moreover, if you consider that Lockheed Martin has retired from the competition from the FAXX, which is also called the NGAD, the equivalent of the NGAD for the US Navy, then it will remain without a program for a main combat aircraft for the coming future. Moreover, considering the change of foreign politics that is happening under the Trump administration, there is the possibility that the production of the F-35s won't be as large as Lockheed Martin is expecting. The American services will still buy the aircraft, but some allies are starting to reconsider this. There will be a short video about this point. And in a normal world, with these considerations, we could probably end the video here. However, what really made waves on the internet, on YouTube, everywhere, are the artist's impression of the new F-47. I have seen everything about it. I have seen people trying to infer performances, range, or equipment. These are artists' impressions. The final aircraft could be rather different. So I really don't want to rush any consideration about the aircraft configuration, the performance, the sensors, and so on. But I will do anyway, because I've seen a lot of, on the internet, and probably it is worth discussing as such. Point number one, did anyone notice that these artists' impressions look very similar to these drawings from the genius Rodrigo Avella, which are artists' impression of the Navy's program, the FA-XX. The two aircraft really look the same. I don't know if this means anything. It could just mean that either Rodrigo was involved or another artist took inspiration from these drawings. I don't know. And by the way, service communication. Sorry, Rodrigo, this is a rush video. I didn't have the time to ask your permission to use these drawings. I really don't want to create problems. I think you are a genius and you deserve all the credit in the world. The other interesting point is that the aircraft seems to have canards, which once upon a time were a big no-no for stealth, but the Chinese have demonstrated that you can achieve a reasonably good stealth using canards as well. Problem is there is an entire generation of, they're usually called NAFO bots or something like that. There are various tribes on the internet. There's always said that US aircraft would never had canards because they are good on other people's aircraft. And I think that they are hoping that the final configuration won't have the canards, because otherwise they will have to manufacture out of thin air a justification for this and to say that they always said that canards were a great idea. Well, they're children that are having fun. Some people have seen some commonalities, some similarities with experimental aircraft of the past, which is may well possible, but we have seen so little of the aircraft, if it is indeed the final aircraft, that is probably not even worth discussing this. The first important aspect is that the dihedral of the wings is quite substantial. This means that the aircraft will be very resistant and very stable in regards to side winds. This is something that you do, or used to do, because today is less important, but you used to do with aircraft that were supposed to penetrate a low level the enemy air defenses. Sorry, this is the editing, guys. I wanted to point out that dihedral is stabilizing for when it comes to side winds, but you can obtain the same effect with the wing mounted high on the fuselage, and most of these aircraft had a wing mounted high on the fuselage rather than an important dihedral. You can combine both, actually, if you think it is a problem. It is not necessarily incompatible with high maneuverability, but it is definitely a strange choice. It is probably like this for stealth reasons, and they are sort of accepting some level of penalty, but we'll see. We need to see more. You can't judge by that. You need to see a picture to appreciate what is going on. The other element is that the overall section of the aircraft is quite flat, which is again connected with stealth, because a tall aircraft has a ratio between the side surface and the volume that is higher than an aircraft that is flat as a pancake. That's the reason why aircraft like the B-2 or the B-21 are that flat, okay? In this way you can still have a lot of internal room, but your side, which is directly exposed to most of the radars, it is relatively small, so your radar cross-section from the side tends to be smaller. It's one of the reasons why the Japanese, before entering the Tempest, now GCAP program, were developing jet engines that were narrow, small, exactly because in this way they could fit inside a flat fuselage. Another interesting element, but this is on shaky ground, is that the nose wheel is just a single wheel. which means that the aircraft is probably not that big. It is probably the size of an F-35 or an F-22. That is, it is not just a scaled-down B-21, like some observers have speculated in the past. It's probably a genuine fighter. However, the size and this configuration sort of contradict the requirement for broadband stealth. That is, for broadband stealth, you need to have something like the B-21 or like the new Chinese J-36. Something very simple with relatively long structural lines. Unless they will rely on new radar-absorbing materials which are capable of broadband attenuation, which, if you ask me, it is quite hard, but, well, it's not impossible that they came up with something particular. So, yes, we will have to wait and see. So, at the end of the day, other than the fact that the program is going to go ahead, we don't know much about the aircraft. We are more or less where we were before. And this is the reason why I am attaching at the end of this video a mashup of content that has already appeared on the channel about the NGAD. So you can refresh your memory, but before, please let me say an enormous thank you to all those who are supporting the channel on Patreon by being a member or by any other of the available means. And if you can support the channel financially, please subscribe if you haven't, hit like, hit the bell so you won't miss anything. So I'm done with the news, but please stay for the rest of the content. See you next time. This is General David Allvin. He is the current Chief of Staff of the US Air Force. Well, he must be. Look at all those decorations. A few days ago, on the 13th of June 2024, he was in an Air and Space Forces Association event, and someone asked a question. What are the service's plans for the NGAD, the Next Generation Air Dominance Fighter? Well, the answer that everybody was expecting was, it is a vital asset that will assure air dominance for decades to come, and the program is on time and within budget. So this is what everyone was expecting him to say. But this is what he said. The deliberations are still underway. There's been no decision made. We are looking at a lot of very difficult options that we have to consider. What? What deliberation is he talking about? Is the NGAD not going to happen anymore? Okay, if you're watching this, you probably already know what the NGAD is. And by the way, we are talking about the Air Force NGAD, not the Navy's NGAD. That is another program entirely. And that one, it is likely going to be postponed indefinitely. The United States Air Force in 2014, even before then the F-35 IOC was declared, started working on the concept for an F-22 replacement. I'm sure that you know that they came up with the idea of a family of systems, with the principal component being a manned aircraft called the penetrating counter-air. And I'm sure you have heard before that it should include broadband stealth and all sorts of science fiction technologies that excite the average nerd. Nobody will have missed that between 2020 and 2023, at least 3 technology demonstrators have flown, and their performance was considered amazing!
Shut up!
And we were all waiting for the announcement of the contract for the full-scale development that had to be assigned more or less now. And then, instead of the contract, out of the blue, Allvin said that the deliberations are still underway, there's been no decision made, and so on. So, what was the change? What could have possibly downgraded a program like the NGAD from a absolutely vital program to a, well, maybe? So the first place I looked into was the wallet. The Air Force is in the process of preparing its fiscal year 26 program objective memorandum, which is a precursor document for the budget. Believe it or not, even the richest Air Force in the world has competing necessities. There are programs that are already ongoing and need to be sustained, otherwise immense efforts will go to waste. Programs like this. This is the B-21, what Northrop calls the first sixth-generation aircraft. This aircraft is key for the United States Air Force and its doctrine. It's not just a stealth bomber, it's designed to be a reliable and survivable node on the network, which is the key component of the US doctrine to fight and prevail in the 21st century. This program is, strangely, on time and within budget, but it is very expensive. The aircraft is flight testing now, and it is not far from being ready to enter service. So a large investment is needed right now. And then there is the new Sentinel ICBM. It is manufactured by the same Northrop Grumman, but in this case the cost ballooned by over 50%, prompting a program review. The missile is sorely needed because the Minuteman III is quickly approaching the end of life, but the program delay is 2 years and mounting. And the Air Force cannot contemplate the idea of leaving all the strategic deterrent in the hands of the Navy. Moreover, the Air Force seems to be sharply focused on getting ready for a fight in the Western Pacific, and this costs money. The new bases, the new logistic capabilities, an entire new infrastructure. It is a hardly visible effort, but it is extremely important. And the NGAD itself is going to be extremely expensive, more than 200 million apiece, according to the current estimates. There is simply not enough budget to do everything. So they may want to delay or, in the worst case, cancel the NGAD program because the Air Force believes other programs are more important. After all, with the F-22 upgrades and the F-35 already in service in large numbers, there are plenty of excellent assets available already. So this was a good explanation, and I made myself a cup of tea. But there was something in the background that didn't sound quite right. There has been a lot of investments in the aircraft so far. It was included in plans and strategies. You don't want to give it up so easily, do you? So I came back to the news article, I checked other outlets, and yes, there was another explanation. The CCA, the Collaborative Combat Aircraft. The CCA is the program to build unmanned combat air vehicles that will team with fighter pilots, covering several roles, integrating or replacing the crewed combat aircraft. The US plan is to give every F-22 or F-35 pilot the capability of coordinating 2 UCAVs, on average, with 6 considered to be the maximum viable. However, with the cost of the program levitating to 30 million apiece, the CCA is no longer treatable. Despite the hype, the capability of giving the aircraft enough autonomy in the real world, not in a simulation, to be really useful is a very tall order. A lot of money will be sunk in that program, and Olvin himself said that the current CCA won't stay in service for long because the technology is evolving so fast that they will need to build something new in the not-so-distant future. So, even more money will be needed. It is quite clear, at least to me, that the Air Force is placing a lot of trust in the CCA. There also have been some interesting war games centered on a Taiwan invasion and featuring the CCA, whose results have been released to the public. It is a great story, but we will cover that on a different video. So it seems that the unmanned aircraft is considered more promising than the manned one, and honestly, this seems strange to me as well. In an organization dominated by pilots, are they choosing to focus on a non-piloted platform? From a cultural point of view, it seems quite strange. You may say that the men and the women shaping the Air Force doctrine and strategy are selfless patriots, but that would be the first time in world history that an organization is consciously making itself obsolete. So why is this happening? Why the NGAD is not considered to be so important anymore? This was unforeseeable just a few weeks ago. The budget constraint doesn't seem to be real, at least to me. Since when the United States doesn't find the money for a military system that is deemed really important? Look at the F-35 that survived a decade of terrible mismanagement, whose consequences are still with us today. If the NGAD is as important as the F-35, it should receive the same treatment. Okay, seriously, to be honest, I see only two reasons. The first is that the Air Force expects to fight China in a very short time, 4 or 5 years. In this case, it is not worth investing massively in a radically new system, but focus on what can be achieved in a short time frame. Aim to 60 more F-35s and the logistics to sustain the fight in the Western Pacific. The second, and I sort of start believing that it is the more likely, it is that they bite more than they could chew, like they did with the F-35 at the beginning. And they are only now realizing the extent of the enterprise they embarked on. So a rethinking of the program may be needed to make the next US fighter something realistically achievable within the century. However, considering the Navy position on the F/A-XX and now the Air Force doubts about the NGAD, it seems that the sixth generation is not going to be around us as fast as it was sold. So, as usual, I guess we just need to wait and see. What would you think if I told you that the United States Air Force is trying to change everything to change nothing?
The novel you are referring to is almost unknown in the English-speaking world, sir.
Okay, but listen to this. In 2019, Will Roper, the Air Force acquisition czar, flaunted the idea of a new digital century series of combat aircraft for the 21st century. In 2021, the then Air Force Chief of Staff General Charles Brown proposed to develop a simpler and lighter aircraft than the F-35 to replace the F-16. And then the HashKit website used this to create the F-36 Kingsnake bubble. Then we had some silence, but recently, in June 2024, General David Olvin, the Air Force Chief of Staff, questioned about the NGAD, the new super-duper sixth-generation fighter aircraft, answered, "The deliberations are still underway, there's been no decision made, we are looking at a lot of very difficult options that we have to consider." The same General Olvin in July 2024 discussed the concept of a notional light fighter, shifting the philosophy from a build to last to build to adapt. And don't even get me started about the Navy's F/A-XX, which is having its share of issues of different nature. Okay, now please don't tell me in the comments that nothing has changed, because clearly something is happening. And stop telling me that when other countries will come up with fifth generation equivalents, the United States will be already on the sixth generation. So this is what we know from the high echelons of the Air Force so far. As you can see, the driver seems to be a combination of several factors. Some are technology related, some are cost related, some others to the military doctrine. But there is an additional complexity dimension in this story, which is the US politics. With the presidential election coming this November, a change of administration may have a non-negligible impact. Trump has always had a different attitude towards the military and the use of force, and if he wins, we may expect some changes. Okay, if you're watching this, you probably already know what the NGAD is. So I want to explain that the Air Force in 2014, even before that the F-35 IOC was declared, started working on the concept for an F-22 replacement. I'm also sure you know that they came up with the idea of a family of systems, with the principal component being a manned aircraft called the Penetrating Counter-Air, PCA for short. And you have heard before that it should include broadband stealth, adaptive propulsion, and all sorts of science fiction technologies that excite the average nerd. Technology demonstrators have flown in the past few years. We were all waiting for the contract for the full-scale development that had to be assigned in spring 2024, and then, instead of the contract, out of the blue, we got.
The deliberations are still underway. There's been no decision made. We're looking at a lot of very difficult options that we have to consider.
Thank you, Otis. The main push toward this change of tack was cost. The estimates put the piloted NGAD at $250 million for the acquisition, which is already a lot of money, and God only knows the potential lifetime cost. However, I believe that there is something else at work here. The notional light fighter discussed by Alvin was slightly smaller and lighter than the F-35, but still a piloted platform. The underlying idea is that since so much of the aircraft capability depends on software, the software should be very easy and quick to upgrade in very fast cycles, while the hardware evolves much more slowly or eventually not at all. Being cheap and small, losses can be accepted more easily, even in the context of large-scale operations. And being cheap, the aircraft lifespan can be shorter, since a larger number could be procured. Moreover, it could fill the niche for low-end fight, which is still a requirement, saving flight hours of the high-end platforms. The aircraft itself will be light but not simple. That is, it should retain the key capabilities being already baked into the F-35. The Air Force is not new to this idea of a light fighter. The F-16 was supposed to be one, but it was turned into anything but. It was very successful in the end, but it was no more a light platform. Please notice that what we are seeing here, it is a three-tier Air Force for the next 40-50 years or so. A top-end piloted platform, the likes of the F-22 now and the PCA in the future, a mid-tier represented by the F-35, and a low tier of light fighters. This is new and unprecedented in the last half-century. No use to say there have been a lot of pushbacks to this option. Look up what the Mitchell Institute is thinking, for example, and various papers and studies have been published against this approach. This idea of versatility is not new in the American debate. In 2019, the then Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology and Logistics, Will Roper, launched the idea of a new Digital Century series. The reference is to the Century series aircraft of the 50s, where in few years, several different models of aircraft were fielded, leading to an unprecedented progress in aerospace technology. The idea was to iterate different designs whose lifespan should be around 10 years to be quickly replaced by new models. The design should be incremental rather than starting from a clean slate every time. Moreover, some of the designs may be specialized aircraft rather than multi-role. The aircraft will not be built for upgradability because it will be quickly replaced by new models. Many different smaller designs mean also a distribution and increment of the industrial capacity that today relies only on three giant firms. Overall, the cost and importance of a single program and the cost of the single aircraft would be reduced, so it would still be possible to produce in relevant numbers and lose aircraft without damaging the force too much. This is different from the light fighter model, but it is yet another way to achieve the versatility and development agility that larger platforms may lack. Some more clarifications on this change of tack came from other interviews with high-ranking officials. And by the way, if you want to see the sources I use for the videos, this is a perk I reserve for patrons and members. After a video, I often publish a list of the sources I use that can be easily accessed by the public. In some cases, I have private conversations, and these are obviously not listed. But anyway, this could be a good opportunity to start supporting the channel if you can afford it. So I was saying that at the beginning of September 2024, other US officials pointed out how one technology has progressed more quickly than expected and through the NGAD program assumptions off balance. And they were referring to the CCA. The Collaborative Combat Aircraft is a large program aimed at producing a combat UCAV, which is autonomous and capable of collaboration with piloted platforms. The aim is to provide each piloted fighter with 2 sidekicks that could execute various tasks. They could transport additional weapons, or could be used as ISR platforms, or they could be put in a harm's way to preserve the piloted aircraft. These will be small, but they won't be simple. They will have high performance, long range, and a suite of sensors and weapons comparable with a piloted platform. In April 2024, a contract was assigned to Anduril and General Atomics to produce the so-called Increment 1 vehicles, that is, the first functioning CCAs. However, it is already clear that an Increment 2 will soon follow because, as we said, the technology is quickly progressing. So it seems that this realization put the NGAD in jeopardy. The NGAD was always intended as a family of manned and unmanned systems, but since the unmanned part has come so far, maybe the manned part is not needed or is needed in very low numbers. The aerospace community at the beginning of 2024 has been taken by surprise by this decision. Some sources reported that high-level executives in the aerospace industry were literally baffled by the decision. I understand them, they were looking forward to another cash cow, it was likely already added to the budgets that maybe it is not going to materialize anymore. The 3 aerospace giants, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman and Boeing, profit the most from large programs that span many decades. These are cost-plus contracts footed by the armed forces that produce a large income stream for decades, first with the aircraft development and production, and then with the aircraft sustainment. Therefore, there is a large lobbying effort to push the legislators towards this kind of monster programs that produce what we see today. A light fighter with a considerably shorter lifespan and fewer or no hardware upgrades doesn't appear to be as profitable. Some elements of the Air Force correctly see this as a problem because there may be only few manufacturers and the barrier to entry for anyone other than the 3 giants is too high. New competitors cannot emerge. There would be a solution, which is fragmenting the giants in different autonomous companies and maybe even nationalizing some of them, but, well, this is not the American style. However, there is another class of issues that is pushing the Air Force towards something simpler and less expensive. They feel that they are underfunded. No jokes, they really do. They do because they have sunk immense amounts of money in the program for the new ICBM. They do because, albeit the B-21 seems a very well-managed program, it is still a very expensive aircraft and a relatively large number is required. They do because, even though only a restricted number of people know what is really going on with the SR-72 program, my guess is that it isn't going to be cheap. They do because the CCA program that was supposed to produce cheap and attreatable aircraft is not cheap and attreatable anymore. At $30 million per airframe, you really think twice before sacrificing one. And finally, they do because the cost of the F-35 fleet is much higher than expected. The acquisition cost is relatively low due to the production scale, but the cost per flight hour is very, very high. So the cost of the aircraft lifetime is eye-watering. Moreover, the maintenance cost of the aging fleet that should have been integrally replaced by the F-35 is increasing too. Older aircraft require more maintenance, so their support costs increase. That's obvious. So basically you are replacing something very expensive with something very expensive. And don't even get me started about the lack of pilots or the cost of setting up the new bases in the Pacific. How all of this could happen is everyone's guess. My take is that this is not even an Air Force's problem, it is a general American Armed Forces problem.
The US Navy in particular has been fascinated with hardware, esteems technical competence, and is prone to trying to overcome its tactical deficiencies with engineering improvements. Indeed, There are officers in peacetime who regard the official statement of a requirement for a new piece of hardware as the end of their responsibility in correcting a current operational deficiency.
Thank you, Otis. So this refers to the US Navy, but it could be easily translated to the Air Force and other armed services. It is a typical American trait to look for technological solutions to every problem. This is in part understandable because in the sky it is much more difficult to hide. It is a level field where the environment has less relevance than in land or maritime engagements. The obvious flip side of the coin, though, is that you must be sure that your technology is clearly, undoubtedly, completely better than everything else you are encountering on the battlefield. Because otherwise you won't be capable of recovering. It will just take too long. This is not me saying there are Air Forces documents where they ask for funds to dominate their battle. The stated purpose is to maintain an overwhelming technology superiority against every conceivable opponent. Probably they are excluding an alien invasion, but otherwise. Obviously, this means keep running forward, trying to develop something new in a never-ending effort to be the best. So maybe, just maybe, they got to the point where this push for better and better equipment starts showing drawbacks and diminishing returns. Cost is the obvious one, but not the worst. For a country like the United States, money is not a scarce resource, at least for now. The worst part is that the increasing complexity means exceedingly long development times, exceedingly long production times, long lead times, and scarce flexibility when in need of ramping up the production. Not to mention the often low production numbers that make every loss a small catastrophe in terms of force effectiveness and reputational damage. I mean, look what happens with the F-35. Every time there is an incident, it makes headlines in the press. Being one of the most technologically sophisticated aircraft in the world, this is not expected to happen. Actually, the aircraft incident record is statistically very good, but the reputational damage that it gets every time there is an incident, it is not inconsequential. So, what will happen now? Well, if I had to guess, I would say almost nothing. The NGAD will go forward with reduced requirements to save some money and some complexity. Nonetheless, it will still be very expensive, very complex, it will be late, and it will be built in low numbers. When it will finally start working, it will be probably extremely effective, like American weapons often are, but it will show all the drawbacks we have discussed in this video. The Air Force has, within its ranks, the capability of thinking outside of the box, but the traditional culture and the economic interests revolving around such a program will inexorably prevail. I guess that the CCA program and other unmanned platforms will have a role in this when the CCA becomes operational, and if it is as effective as expected, it will occupy the niche of a light fighter. So there will be no need for smaller or specialized piloted platforms. Thank you very much for watching this video. It was an honor to have had your time. Please, if you can, only if you can, consider supporting the channel on Patreon or by being a member or in any other way that suits you. There is also a GoFundMe available, which is actually connected with a book I am trying to prepare. Please check all the links in the description. If you can't support the channel, which is perfectly fine, please do the other YouTube stuff like subscribing if you are not, hitting like or dislike if you didn't like the video, hitting the bell if you want to be notified when a video comes out. This is helping immensely with the algorithm. So, thank you so much for watching from me and Otis, and see you next time.